hero.
Hi guys, what's going on, and welcome back to another video on Conqueror's Blade. As we dive into the Chevaliers, they have finally been released. Well, I know I say this a lot, but what an interesting unit. I think we'll kind of break this intro into two parts. Let's talk about the unit mechanics first, and then we'll dive a little bit more into opinion, some of the good things and some of the problems that the unit currently faces. So, the most unique thing about the unit is the fact that they get a retinue. No other unit, obviously, in the game gets this. And there's essentially three units you can pick from. Some Courtiers, some Tenant Farmers as a unit of peasants, or some Domain Arbalists as a crossbow unit. Which, interestingly, I noticed one of the few units I actually haven't fully leveled up. For me, I can't see... I've tried a few... I tried the peasants and I tried the Domain Arbalists. I can't see how you can use anything other than the Courtiers. It's a mobile cavalry unit. It's for flanking. It's for getting around the big charges in. Realistically, it just doesn't work for me, in my opinion, having anything else other than the cavalry unit. So for me, that's what I found works best. Does it add a lot? Not loads. If you get a nice charge, Courtiers do a little bit of extra damage on the front. But more importantly, they actually kind of soak up the range damage. You charge a unit of Senjis, can't even say them, and your Courtiers are always in front of your Chevaliers. So your Courtiers basically get shot, and then your Chevaliers can just run over everything when they reach them. So, I don't know, kind of works out quite nicely. I would say that the Courtiers do add something to the unit. Elsewise, you've got two abilities. You've got an Assault, which is essentially a charge, and you've also got a Lance Thrust. Now, we'll come on to this in a little bit more detail, but some people are claiming that the Lance Thrust is currently bugged and basically just not working at all. Now, I must admit, I'm kind of inclined to agree. It doesn't really seem to do anything. You would kind of expect a fairly sort of instantaneous response from the unit that when you press it, they stab, they thrust, they do some sort of animation. Don't really seem to do anything. It doesn't really seem to have any impact on their melee. So, yeah, it could well be that this is currently bugged out. This is Conqueror's Blade after all. It would hardly be that surprising if something didn't work. Elsewise, on the unit traits, they have the Retinue Company, which we know, which is essentially the Courtiers. Knightly Arrogance, the lower the tier of the enemy the unit, the more damage it does to them. So if you tread over a unit of peasants, it slaughters them quite easily. But then, I think it would have done anyway, so seems not a particularly useful unit trait. And then we get Striking Cavaliers, which means that they take increased damage against enemy ranged units while you're charging at them. But that's why those Courtiers are even more useful. Two options, basically, to go for on the veterancy line. The top line is slightly more attack focused, and the bottom line is slightly more defense focused. I think both look like they could potentially be viable. There's things like this, after Chevaliers attack a target, their retinue would do 15% more damage, but after you charge in, my Courtiers are going to be landing first before the Chevaliers, so it kind of seems a bit pointless. And it's not as if you get a good defense buff on the last one, you just get one more soldier to the unit. Things I liked the look of along the top line was just the increased damage. There's one somewhere about reduce interval between attacks, so I think that means essentially attack speed. And there's also a chance to ignore armor and stuff like that. So a few more interesting ones along the top line, in my opinion. Now, that kind of leads on to what's good and what's bad about the unit. In my opinion, the most comparable unit to them is obviously going to be Monastics. And in terms of the charge, I think the charge is fairly comparable. They charge quite nicely. It does a reasonable amount of damage. You've got to bear in mind, I suppose they've got a unit of Courtiers with them as well. So you're kind of getting a little bit of extra charge damage from that. But yeah, it seems to work quite decently. Not amazing, but a solid, decent charge. And we'll see that in some of the clips we look at. But the big problem comes with melee. They're just utterly hopeless, like really bad. Which is, I think, what's led Rise to the thinking about the Lance Thrust being bugged. Because the melee of the unit, it's almost like the AI can't really lock on or see enemy targets. It's a bit like Iron Reapers used to be after they first got that really heavy nerf. The attack speed almost got so low that they could just almost never attack anything. And because this lance thrust doesn't seem to really activate any instantaneous animation, there's no real backup to make that melee better. So that's where they really fall down, and Monastic's melee is obviously pretty decent. If you've ever played with Monastics, you sort of walk them through a unit of enemies, and they quite happily stab around them with their lances and sort of wreak havoc amongst everything. And so it's the melee where the unit really falls down. But that being said, the charge is still nice. Not really a unit initially that I think is sort of worth charging to unlock. Will be interesting to see over the coming days if they make any announcement though about the lance thrust, because if that does get updated, gets changed, maybe they make a patch, slightly tweak the attack speed, then I could see this being a really interesting unit, because at least in terms of defensive values, they're really, really quite nice. So let's just move on then very quickly to doctrines wise. There's a couple of Chevaliers specific ones. Increase unit movement speed by 10%. Well, I'd normally throw a 6% movement speed doctrine on anyway, so that's just a better version of it, so well worth having. There's then the increase all defense value by 100 points. Well worth having in my opinion, that's pretty decent. That's quite a big increase in defense. Puts you up much closer towards that 1,000. I suspect if you're going to go the bottom line, you might even be able to get that up to 1,000 in some areas. Then we've got this one. This is the one I think is probably a little bit more touch and go. Increase piercing AP as a base by 150. On its own, a nice doctrine in many senses, and that takes their piercing AP over 1,700, which is quite nice. It means you're going to be dealing quite effectively against heroes and reapers. The problem is, of course, that their base damage is really rather low, and effectively you've not got room to get a piercing damaging doctrine on. And obviously with their melee, how useful really is this piercing armor penetration? So this is probably the one doctrine I'm most in question with. Of course, the extra charge damage and a little bit of cooldown, an extra 10-second cooldown on charge, which is obviously well worth having as well. So anyway, I think we've probably waffled on long enough. We can see unit kit costs 5.9, but I suspect it's at half price because we're on the season, so it's not too bad, at least at the moment, although obviously still fairly expensive. It is a Goldern era unit. But anyway, let's hop into some battles with them, see what we can do, see if we can run anyone over with our charge and try and avoid getting into too much melee combat. I've had quite a few terrible games with this unit, but this is one of the more decent ones I had, and decent is used sort of in inverted commas. But on the Viking Siege map Highlings Ford, I was trying to see if there's any opportunity to get a good charge in on A, and essentially there wasn't. But as we came back round, the enemy was making a push on B, so we get ourselves lined up and we go on. Courtiers going first, followed by the Chevalier, grab ourselves a nice double hero kill and go in and get the disturbance with the group. It puts the enemy unit straight into rout, and even like this, the unit can actually manage to get a little bit of melee damage against routing units. So yeah, getting the hero kill really made the difference there for us. And we can sort of clear up, pick ourselves up 50-60 kills, and you can kind of see a little bit what the unit's like. The charge is good. You see the sort of damage we got was decent, but still not amazing. I mean, we're nowhere near sort of Keshig level of hero damage. We basically put the full unit through those two heroes, including the Courtiers as the rescue, and it still only just about killed the enemy heroes. As we come back round though, the enemy's starting to push on A. We can line ourselves up and get another charge in. And you get an idea from here the sort of damage we get against this unit of shields. Do manage to get ourselves another enemy hero flattened down. We pick ourselves up another 20 or so kills as we charge through the enemy shields. But then we come on to the real big weakness of the unit. They just don't do anything, really. Look, they're pushing the unit right through a unit of Reapers there, and they just don't stab down really at all. If they were Monastics in that situation, okay, they wouldn't be killing the Reapers, they'd probably still lose the fight, but they would at least be doing damage. The Chevaliers just sort of don't do anything. Whether you leave them on normal, whether you press the lance thrust, just really seem to have no melee capability. And that's kind of the biggest problem with them. And that's got to really reflect into my playstyle. I can't really find any way of doing them other than charging. So I've been really trying to get these burst charges. Look at that nice bit of damage, which gets myself killed. Get ourselves 20 or so kills. But after that, they just don't do anything. So unless you win the fights on the charges, like in this case, then it sort of works. Right, because you get a nice charge off, you get a lot of damage, pick up a good number of kills, flatten an enemy hero or two, a little bit of infantry support moving in as well. We can win and overwhelm the fight on the charge. And so the charge is what wins us the fight, not the sort of very mediocre melee that follows up on the unit. Then we can send them back to the supply point, and the unit actually survives, and we can follow up with another charge later on in the game. But more often than not, I end up in fights like this where I'm looking for my opportunity, see a good charge opportunity, get myself lined up, decide to make my move, get a good charge off, get lots of damage in, get quite a few kills, plenty of damage, see all the numbers popping up, but not really enough to definitively win the fight. And so therefore the unit can't really get itself out because it can't really do anything about it melee-wise. And that's kind of the biggest problem I'm thinking they're facing. And so I guess we should attempt to draw some sort of conclusion. Is the unit worth unlocking in the current situation? I think for me, I'd kind of probably say no. I'm not necessarily saying it's a directly bad unit. Can it be made to work? Yeah, to some extent, yes. It does have a decent charge. But the melee is kind of a very limiting factor. And for the leadership cost at 330, and it's getting a seasonal reduction, at the moment, for me, it isn't really a viable unit. Would be interested to hear your thoughts on that though. I heard quite a few people saying they also think it's bugged and not really working. Is that the case for you? If that is, do let me know kind of what you think, what you've found with the unit so far in the comments down below. Would be kind of interested to hear your thoughts on it. Anyway, that's all we've got time for today's video. Hopefully it's been enjoyable. Let me know what you think, as always, and I shall see you guys all on the next video.